So which one's top?
In Joburg, budget 2014. Cape Town design in Durban.
Sunny Meadows.
Ja, in Cape Town.
So the Cape Town, the second one after design number, is it budget or is it Eminem?
It's Eminem.
Oh, you? Shame, people don't worry about the.
No, it's budget.
Oh, okay.
Budget, Cape Town, Eminem.
Okay. So just save pictures.
Okay, so if you don't mind sitting one here and one here in the middle of the couch.
Sure.
And these will be either of
Is that
these two
there and
seats.
there or there and there?
Here and here.
there and here, and then
All
we've
right.
got to have a third person over here.
Oh, I see, all right. Let's put this out of the way then.
Sure.
Down here somewhere.
Oh yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, this is going to be the neck.
Okay.
And then try and put it just on the
If you can just thread that up
No, no.
underneath your shirt. Yeah.
Can I take my jacket off?
Yeah,
I
of
didn't want
course.
it to be formal.
Yeah.
Up and not
Well,
down.
yours can't be in and out, can it?
just under.
Hello.
I'm a speaker.
Oh, hello, Andre.
Hi, Andre.
Hi.
Hi, I'm a speaker, Melanie.
Okay, this will be on one side. Yeah, just exactly the way you did it. And we have a third guest joining us on Google Hangout here.
How should we do this?
We have got
Yeah.
Terry on the
Presume
other
that way.
side coming now.
Yeah. Let me just clip it
Oh,
for
no,
you.
you do it.
Nee, 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 kom binnen. Of ja, net aan jou nou.
You can just clip that.
Yes, you're going to sit in the corner there. Like the naughty
And now
child.
this,
In
if
the
we can
corner.
just put that
Decide
right
it.
behind
Is-
you
is-
so I can hide the cable.
All right,
and
is
then-
it all switched on automatically?
It is, yes.
Okay.
And if I can ask you to just, whether you can maybe try and tuck that sort of into your belt or, just as long as it's hidden.
I feel uncomfortable.
Andre, how would you like to be introduced?
What were the choices? I teach economics at a business school,
Okay, so
Stellenbosch University Business School. I'm not sure what the Africa risk is all
I
about.
don't know what that is either.
No.
Dan, this is the wrong titles. Just check that everything. Okay, so
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
we'll do.
USB is University of Stellenbosch Business School.
Okay, so it's an economist at the University of Stellenbosch.
Business School, yes. And I head up the Institute for Futures Research.
That's
You do the introduction, then, speaker.
I'll introduce Andre at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. Yes.
And then Melanie Maleski.
I'll do
Maleski
that.
or Maleski? Maleski. Associate Tax Director at Deloitte.
Yes, and then
You'll
who are
do
the
that.
people? I'll do that.
Yeah.
University of Stellenbosch, can you hear us?
School. Yes, and who is the person on Google Hangout with us? Him.
Here. Yeah,
Well, how do we pronounce his name? Craig Polkinghorn.
we can hear you.
I know, Craig Polkinghorn.
That's correct.
Thank you, Craig.
Talking horn. Okay.
I'm going to be keeping time for you. So I won't put this in your face the whole time. I'll indicate it to you 3 minutes, and then 2 minutes, and then turn it around for the last minute.
Okay.
Or
once
would you
we-
prefer to see it all?
I would prefer to see it.
Okay,
if you
that's
don't mind.
fine.
Once we have 2 minutes left, if everybody can just know that once they have 2 minutes left, we're going to have a look at, Terry? At 2 minutes left, we're going to have a look at the social media. So we start wrapping up at about 4 minutes and taking the final questions and sort of answers so that we, by 2 minutes, we can go to switch to social media.
Okay, do you have all your social media
No,
information?
Dan still has to.
Dan's got the social
Dan's
media.
got the social media.
By that you mean questions coming in?
Not questions, just feedback from
Twitter's,
from-
okay.
Yeah. That's it. So that's got. Do you want to do that? I do that.
Go ahead. You've been more accustomed to it than me in this environment.
Okay, and then so on review, economist at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, and Melanie Maleski, associate tax director at Deloitte. Are you going to introduce Craig?
Craig? Oh, I don't mind, yes.
Yes.
And should I introduce at the same time? We better do that, or are they going to switch across or not? What are they going to do? Do we say, and in Johannesburg we have on Google Hangout?
Yes, just like that.
Craig
He's as if he
Polkinghorn.
was here with us.
Is it, so you've got him on?
Yes.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah, no, I'll do Craig.
Okay, you'll do Craig.
Oh, sorry, Terry Bell.
Years ago.
I think we did. I remembered your face. I came in.
I remember right away.
By Stellenbosch, by Universiteit.
Well, the business school.
Yeah, definitely.
Futures Research.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
Is there anything in particular you'd like us to ask you? Craig, this goes for you too. Is there any particular question? You are in the general part of the panel discussion. So any particular question that any one of you would like us to ask? right now, I'll tell you the questions that we do have. What are your overall thoughts on the budget? That's very basic. I would like it if all three of you could give your thoughts on it.
Balanced, unbalanced,
Balanced,
whatever.
those sort of things. Don't you agree that some of the forecasts on deficits and inflation look quite grim? I mean, you don't have to agree, but that's just the question posed. Or the opposite. You know what I'm saying? So that could be look quite grim, or perhaps the opposite. No, we'll put that there. But somebody's going to say, well, why didn't you say the opposite? Believe me, I'll do that. And then, do you think the government has factored in fully in its estimates the rise in fuel costs and the volatility of the rand, the additional cost of e-tolls and Gauteng in its estimates? Do you think in estimates in this budget? In its estimates in this budget?
Or perhaps any other risks.
Yes.
And we could also deal with things like irregular expenditure and whether they've dealt with it enough, considering that they allegedly dealt with it last year.
Okay. Do you think that the government has dealt with the issue of irregular expenditure?
What do you mean by irregular?
This is the councils, the tenders, etc. The stuff that the Auditor General came up with, 26 point something billion rand, you know. I mean, they refer to this as part of the potential income flow,
Okay.
and then we don't get it.
Okay. So do you think that the, I mean, Terry, you could also has dealt with the issue of
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Fin24 panel discussion on Budget 2014. I'm Mushfiqa Botha.
And I'm Terry Bell.
With us in studio today we have Andre Roux, economist at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, and Melanie Mileski, Associate Tax Director at Deloitte.
And in Johannesburg we have Craig Polkenhorn of Standard Bank.
Okay, let's start this off. What are your overall thoughts on this budget?
Well, first of all, I think, given all the constraints, the Minister was remarkably composed and calm. There were many constraints, many challenges, many of which were well publicized beforehand, with the global story, our own domestic constraints, and yet he managed to bring in a budget with a deficit of around about 4%, slightly smaller than he anticipated late last year. Spending more or less on track, revenue more or less on track. So as a bookkeeping exercise, it looked fairly solid. Of course, the devil's in the detail. The devil lies in what's behind all these numbers, the nature of the spending, the quality of the spending, etc. But in terms of how the world, how investors would look at the budget as a bookkeeping exercise, they wouldn't probably, they're not going to rush to invest here, but probably wouldn't deter them from investing.
So there were no real surprises?
Well, perhaps the only big surprise was that it came in on budget.
What about the fuel price levy? I didn't think that was going to go in terms of the way the deficit's looking, the way the cost of living and inflation breaking through the 6% barrier.
You mean you didn't expect it to be so high or so low?
I didn't expect them to increase the levy.
No, I think that was on the cards. I think the surprise is it was as low as it was, given the circumstances.
But
Melanie, do you think that this is the sort of tax relief that was expected before the budget? Do you think this came about?
Certainly, the budget doesn't seem surprising from a tax point of view. One wouldn't have expected much relief, more than the inflation relief which has been announced. And the positive is that no new taxes have been announced. I don't think we expected those, or we certainly didn't expect those, but it's really positive to see that there are no new taxes. As individuals, that was certainly a real concern, that personal income tax, for instance, the highest marginal rate of tax could have been pushed up, and it hasn't been.
So you're looking at
under pressure, and I think that is really positive that we're not seeing that.
There's
so
also
that was a
been
good surprise, sorry.
A bit of promotion for SMMEs, so that should help. And I mean, from a banking and corporate point of view, there's always been a push to actually see something being put into small and medium enterprises. Do you agree with that, Keith? Craig, beg your pardon. I'm sorry, we don't seem to be able to get hold of Craig in Johannesburg, so Andre, could you get us?
Sort of pursuing that kind of theme, as a bookkeeping exercise, not too bad. There was detail, and you touching on some more longer-term structural issues, of course, that are crucial. The NDP was mentioned, and quite rightly so. We need to see more of that, I believe. One single year's budget doesn't solve or resolve many structural problems, of which there are, well, we can start with the obvious ones: chronic unemployment, sluggish economic growth, inflation moving in the wrong direction, balance of payments, uncertainties. And I think it's important that we start taking a look at much more, as I say, long-term structural issues and resolutions for these issues, such as SMEs, such as the very desperate need for much higher savings. We've got one of the lowest savings ratios in the world, and therefore finding it difficult to finance investment. In essence, we're a deficit country. We spend more than we earn nationally. As individuals, we spend more than we earn.
Yes.
We import more than we export, and government spends more than it earns. And as such, that means we're always going to be vulnerable or reliant upon foreign capital inflows.
But we're also going to continue to import more than we export because of the cost factors, as Whitey Basson said only this week. So is this not a major problem? Do you think they've factored in enough about the exchange rate value of the rand, the way it's fallen? I mean, this is going to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, not just the exchange rate, all the other risks that go with that, increase in fuel price, volatility of the rand, additional cost of e-tolls in Gauteng. Do you think that those things were factored in enough in the estimates made in the budget?
Well, let me put it this way. I think that the budget looks good this year, the estimates for next year, the median term are looking good, but it's extremely vulnerable to these kind of risks. Vulnerable to the growth forecast, which might disappoint. It disappointed last year. It might disappoint again for some of these kind of reasons. I think we're all aware of the fact that our economic growth rate is disappointing, is sluggish, and underperforming compared to many of our peer countries, whether it be the rest of Africa or the rest of the developing world. And there must be fundamental reasons for that, of which not sufficient SME participation is one. Logistics is another one. Infrastructure must be another one. So I think there are many risks. Exchange rate. Exchange rate, as I say, the real risk there to me is the volatility. I was looking recently, 3 years ago, we were up in arms about the so-called strong rand. Now 3 years later, we're up in arms again. The point is, it goes up by 30 and drops by 25 and up by 30. That's the real story. Not so much with the level at any given moment, but the fact doesn't stick to that level. And again, that comes back to we are living beyond our means in terms of savings. But
it also means there's a big problem, I mean, with a very small tax base as it is. There is an argument being made by the alternative people putting forward an alternative tax that we should actually put in a progressive tax rate for those who are paid more than 5 million rand a year, for example. Because, I mean, if we added on, say, another 5%, that would bring in a substantial number of billions. And then also we've got the Public Investment Corporation. They're sitting with about $1.5 trillion of money that's just sitting there. The accident road accident fund, is grossly underspent. So maybe these are funds we could tap into. I mean, it's not exactly a tax thing, Melanie, but I mean, you could use it.
No, it isn't. There's any number of means. As you say, you could impose a tax on the wealthy, although there's a relatively small number of people that you would be relying on. I believe that a hike in the VAT rate would also go well towards improving our revenue collection. And it's not a particularly popular suggestion, but it's a consumption tax. It's collected on a transactional basis, so it's collected regularly. It's a simple system to collect. And I believe it requires further thought.
And I do well, you could do a transaction tax as well, for example, on all financial transactions.
Yes, and those sort of things will definitely increase the revenue flow.
It would.
Which is, Melanie, would you say is that what we would need?
Certainly in the short term, we need further revenue. We can see the demands on government for spending, for health, for social spending, education, infrastructure. That money needs to come from somewhere, and where the economy is growing at such a slow rate, ideally growth in the economy is your first choice.
And we should be pushing it more aggressively.
We should be pushing that. As an interim solution, perhaps looking at additional revenue sources through taxes is an option.
But I think another point that Terry is addressing perhaps is that sometimes the revenue is there, we're not always able to spend it in the right way or efficient way. And that's part of what you're talking about there.
Yes, I remember also, I mean, the Auditor General last year was near 33 billion, I think, in wasteful expenditure, which could not be accounted for. That's an awful lot of money.
And often unspent money.
Indeed. The other thing is to the tender factor, but I'm going back to now maybe about 15 years ago, as I recall, we said we needed at least a 6% GDP growth in order to stand still. If we look at the projections now, we're not talking even 4 or 5%.
Well, that is why I was saying that earlier, as a sort of staying alive exercise, understandable, but we need far more, I think, at all levels, at all forums, thinking about the 10, 15, 20-year kind of strategy. And there the basics are pretty obvious. You need a high level of savings, you need to become more competitive, which addresses things such as labor and logistics. You need, obviously, good governance at both the corporate and the governmental level. You need good, solid, reliable fiscal policy and inflation. Those are things that need to be put into place long term.
Well, what about, for example, a radical thing, the Tobin tax? I'm sure you're aware of it. The idea of putting a minimal tax on every single financial transaction, wiping out income tax, wiping out VAT. Actually, if you work it out, even at 0.05%, you'll pull in much more than the entire tax base already.
Yes, so these things need to be investigated, considered.
Okay, as we wrap up, I just want to get your final thoughts on the budget. good, bad, in between? Andre?
I think the circumstances a B plus.
Melanie?
It's reasonably good. It paints a positive picture. It certainly leaves a warm, fuzzy feeling. And again, you know, whether it will withstand long-term
And whether
plans.
the implementation of everything comes about.
Absolutely. That's where the critical factor lies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay tuned so that you can view our next segment on how the budget affects tax. Are you going to edit this again?
I'm going to put out segments of it.
Okay, so can I just say the stay tuned piece again? Because I just looked at Jerusha instead of at the camera.
I thought it was live.
Well done.
Yeah. Is it live? Oh, God, I hate that. I looked at you. I'm thinking, the hell, you're standing there with the iPad. Why the hell am I looking at you? Sorry. Do me a favor.
Hardly noticed.
Do me a favor. Terry didn't notice when it came to 2 minutes. So
No.
raise your hand.
Yeah, I didn't want to turn. I didn't want to
Because
turn
I
away
know, I
because
saw
thought
that.
you-
I saw that he didn't want to turn. So position
Yeah, you
yourself
feel
so that.
better, yeah.
Thank you so much.
I know.
Okay, now I'll check this over.
Sorry?
I looked at
welcome to the Fin24 panel discussion on tax reforms and budget 2014. I'm Mushfiqa Botha.
I'm Terry Bell.
With us in studio today, we have Zahra de Villiers, Tax Director at KPMG. Welcome, Zahra.
Oh, okay.
We also have Mike Touche, Partner at Tax Consultancy Mazars.
Hi there, good evening.
Well, I'd like to ask the first question, and that's on the basis of, since we have the Davis Committee sitting and we're waiting to hear from them about what we're supposed to have as a review, were there any surprises in what Pravin Gordhan had to say? Over to you, Zahra.
No. We didn't expect any changes in the tax rate, personal, corporate, or VAT. So absolutely no surprises there. And you're absolutely right in terms of the Davis Committee. We're waiting for those reforms to come through. There were two that the Minister mentioned. The one was on the small and medium enterprises. Did say that they were looking at reducing compliance costs for those entities. That's welcome, as the compliance really is quite expensive for those small entities.
Would you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, look, I think it's, he's looking at taking away the small business corporation tax regime and replacing it with a compliance rebate. He was referring to only 50,000 businesses that fall within that regime. I think it's maybe a pity. We see a lot of businesses that do utilize that regime and do actually take advantage of it, and they're thriving businesses employing a lot of people. Yes, like all tax allowances, there is a little bit of abuse. He was referring to some professional firms that fall within it, that he doesn't quite like it, and in that regard, they lost a case recently.
Do you think this is a bit of a feedback from Davis already, or?
Well, he did mention that it was going to be a
That's
feedback,
what I
yeah.
thought.
Yes, he said he's taken two reforms, which sometimes is worrying because, you know, we haven't seen the whole suite, and I'm not sure if Treasury are going to just cherry pick and take those elements which they feel suit themselves. But yeah, let's wait and see.
That was my next question, because the thing is they might well cherry pick, because I think a lot of people thought with Davis sitting there, they might come up with some really radical proposals given our small tax base. And I bring up again the Tobin tax, which has been touted around the world, the so-called transaction tax, financial transaction tax. I'm not saying that they will be introduced, but I'm saying something along the radical lines, but we're not going to get it, obviously.
Well, we don't know. We're waiting on the Davis Committee to come up with their proposals.
Very diplomatic.
There was nothing in the budget besides the two that the Minister referred to. As I said, the small business, we do need to, as you mentioned, to expand on our base. Too few in terms of personal taxes. There's about 388,000 people that contribute to just under 50% of taxes contribute to the personal income tax in our country. We need to have more people broaden the base.
So we need to increase the tax base.
Yeah.
Mike, if I could ask you, what would you say would be the overall effect of the tax reforms in Budget 2014 on the ordinary South African consumer?
But I think what he has done is given the usual fiscal relief, inflation relief, the 9 billion they referred to. And again, as in the past, they've geared it more towards the lower income earners, whereas the high income earners aren't going to have that great effect. So I don't think you got that on the one side. On the other hand, fuel will go up by 20 cents, and maybe a little bit of the sin taxes, as usual, are being increased. It looks like he hasn't been as aggressive on the increases in the sin taxes. So, you know, maybe not really better off, and not much really worse off. And I think that's commended because, you know, come midterm, we were all expecting that possible rates could increase because he was going to be below targets, and he's basically kept it, I suppose, as is.
So could we look at that as being a surprisingly good aspect of the 2014 budget?
Yeah, in terms of the revenue collections, it wasn't expected that they were going to come in, and that was obviously quite good. And we were just chatting on where those additional revenues could have come from, and potentially it could have come from the Tax Administration Act, the penalties and interests that are now being levied on companies for not conforming, not complying.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that, and SARS have been quite sticky about that. So that could well be an element where
Isn't SARS one of, well, SARS is, I think, probably the most efficient, or perhaps the only truly efficient government department. I mean, they really have cracked the whip.
Well, I don't know if I'd want to say that. Look, I think they've been very good. No, look, I think they've been very good. They've put in some very good reforms. They have made the tax process a lot easier, and at the same time, they've broadened that base. You know, 10 years ago we were 4 million taxpayers, we're now 15 million. Yes, have a look at those taxpayers. There's not a huge amount that they contribute, but at least you've got the base to work from. And you know, you've got 15 people in the system, let them be compliant.
Isn't it still skewed though? Because I mean, in the past, if we go back, okay, maybe 20 years, corporate taxes were the bulk. Today, it's overwhelmingly personal tax. So perhaps in the future one should be looking at, or maybe Davis will be looking at, some extra tax on beneficiation of minerals, etc., or on exports or something like that?
Look, I think we've got to be careful. You know, we do want to be a competitive country for foreign direct investments. We don't want to be in a situation where we don't attract that investment. So one of the tax, like any other business expense and any decision to invest in a country, is an important aspect. So you still want to remain competitive so that you can actually attract those foreign investments into this country.
What more could we do? I mean, if we look at in terms of dropping our tariffs, etc., went way beyond what the World Trade Organization asked for. We still didn't get the inflows. We get a lot of inflows into portfolio investment, but very little into greenfields. I mean, we hailed the 30 billion into ABSA, Barclays buying ABSA. That was buying a going concern, and in dividends alone, they probably got the money back in 8 years. So, I mean, we should really be looking at something, surely gearing our taxes in such a way that we do actually attract. I don't know how. Perhaps you have some suggestions.
One of the things that we have seen is that with foreign companies coming in, just getting them registered for VAT, for example, takes months. And that you can't do that when a company coming into South Africa. You want to make it easier for people to come and invest in our country. And that is it's been quite a big thing.
Zahra, what would you say foreign investors would be thinking of the tax reforms in South Africa's 2014 budget?
Well, in terms of, as I said, we haven't looked at streamlining that process, but as SARS is working on many of the processes, so we could see that changing, but nothing has come out. In terms of foreigners coming into South Africa, a big good thing is that our corporate tax rate has not increased. Companies don't want to pay more tax when they come and invest here. So that is something that they will surely look at.
Look, I'm not so sure it's only taxes that are the influencer of foreign investors. What I am saying is I think our current tax regime is fairly competitive when you compare it on a worldwide basis. And the move from STC regime to the dividends withholding tax regime has all aided and assisted that. So I don't think the fiscal or the tax system is an inhibitant. It could well be something else. And I think maybe government and other departments should maybe have a closer look to see what they can do to bring more foreign investment into the country.
Mentioned too, and that's efficiency. But we've been going on about this. I can think of every single budget speech, State of the Nation address, various political announcements. They've always talked about the need to cut red tape, the need to be more efficient. Every time we hear this, and then nothing seems to happen. I mean, this time again we have the same sort of promises about cutting public expenditure as well. And let's hope it's going to happen
Is this budget again going to be, is this budget lip service? And what is it going to take to see that it is implemented?
I think in terms of, it started last year. The minister did indicate that they're looking at the misuse of funds, misappropriation of funds. So there have been many actions taken on that part, and we will see that continue because people want to see that the money that they're contributing to the fiscus is being spent in the intended way. So I think we will see, I don't think it's lip service, I think we will see a move towards curbing any sort of frivolous and wasteful expenditure.
There's a lot of talk too about the outflow of funds and the use of tax havens, Virgin Islands, Bahamas, etc. And also the funds going through via Zimbabwe and Zambia, etc., as many of our corporates have moved north. And I'm sure that there's a leakage there. Do you think that's being dealt with?
Well, I think we've got a lot of anti-avoidance legislation, which is very strict. And corporate South Africa, who I think are tax compliant, as can be seen by the collections, are adhering to those rules and regulations. So I think just getting back to whether he's paying lip service, you know, in all fairness, they've put the building blocks in place. We've got a Tax Administration Act that has been put in place. SARS are now only starting to work with it. They're starting to understand it. We as practitioners are also starting to get to grips with it. In certain instances, and you alluded to it, it's maybe a little bit harsher in that the penalty regime is starting to bite. But at the same time, SARS have put in some initiatives to relax it a little bit.
Okay. I just want to, before we go to the end of the segment, if you don't mind, I just want to have a look at what our Fin24 users are saying on social networks. On Facebook, Monique Nodia asked, what about taxing government officials who use government credit cards at KFC? She says, tax the overworked and underpaid to give the lazy and unappreciative. Somebody else on Facebook, Kenesi Jamoholo, 69 cents for each bottle of booze. That's too much. Sorry, Kena, nothing much we can do about that now. Then we're looking at Fin20 user Meling Kulbi on Twitter. There are a lot of things which need to be done immediately, though, and which are very important too. As we wrap up, is there anything, your final thoughts on what the tax reforms on Budget 2014 means?
Yeah, I welcome the tax-free portion now of in terms of the retirement reforms. It moves up from 315,000 to 500,000. A lot of people will look forward to that. There hasn't been a change in that since 2007, with all the reforms coming in next year on the 1st of March 2015, where contributions by companies to pension and provident funds will become a taxable fringe benefit with deductions as well. People will look forward to saving a bit more for retirement, and this will obviously help.
Mike?
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of the recommendations are very technical in nature, no big fireworks, a couple of little minor adjustments, but there's going to be a lot of tweaking on the tax side that we'll see in the amending legislation coming through.
Thank you so much, Mike. Shukran, Zohra. And stay tuned for our next segment on how Budget 2014 impacts on politics.
Thank you.
Fin24 panel discussion on the political aspect of the 2014 budget. I'm Mishweka Botha, and with us in studio today, we have Dick Forslund, who is the economist and researcher at the Alternative Information and Development Center. Welcome, Dick.
Thank you for inviting me.
Next to him, we have trade union activist Dale Forbes. Welcome, Dale.
Thank you for having me.
And my partner in crime,
I'm Terry Bell, and in Durban on Google Hangout, we have Daniel Silk, who is a political analyst and director of Political Futures Consultancy. Hello, Daniel.
Hello there, good to be with you.
Thank you. Let's jump straight into this. With an election looming, gentlemen, tell me, is this budget going to appeal to the masses, to the voting masses? Is this budget going to appeal to the voting masses? Dick, what are your thoughts on this?
No, it will not. Well, it's all about, it's not about, this budget is not about appealing to the voting masses. It's about to appeal to the voting few inside the country, but mostly I think it's about appealing to those who are voting with their money. That is the big financial institutions, the financial speculators, huge hedge funds and so on. And what the Pravin Gordhan is saying is that there will be no change in policy, or even sharper than that. And I don't know now if we are full circle back to the gear policy of 1996, because there's a lot here about reshoring investment of their sort of there's tax cuts, incentives, ensuring them of property rights. There will be no more discussion, of course, about the nationalization of the mines and so on. And when it comes to a thing, just like a signal, a symbol, you have an increase of the child support grant with 10 Rand a month for 6 months, and with 20 Rand again, 10 Rand again in October. So on the average, it's an increase of the childcare grant of 15 Rand, which is an increase of 3.3% on the average for the year. But I mean, inflation now stands at 6%, and it's increasing. So yeah, so it's effectively a cut to those who are getting child grant. And it's kind of like a needle pinch, but it's a signal to the financial investors.
Dale, what are your thoughts on
I agree with Dick. I think that this is an attack against working people in this country. It's a consolidation of the elite that Pravin claims that he's attempting to avoid. I think the fact that there are really nothing that's been offered to poor people, as Dick has indicated on the grant side, minimal increases. Company taxation has not been increased. Taxation of the richest people in our country has not been increased. The unemployment or the gap between rich and poor continues to widen. Corporations continue to make record profits in various industries. And Pravin is all it is doing is protecting the established elite in this country, the established rich, and have absolutely continued to undermine the poor and the unemployed in this country.
Daniel, how do you feel about this?
Well, thanks. Yes, no, look, I think this is a typical pre-election budget from an incumbent government trying to sell the best picture possible in advance of the election. I think any government anywhere in the world that had an election moving a few months away and had to present the budget would clearly try and synchronize the budget with the ruling party's prevailing narrative or message. And I think what we saw, particularly from Gordhan, was a stress upon the desired implementation of the National Development Plan post-May the 7th. This plays, of course, into the ANC's economic policy initiatives into the future. And I think not only that they do that, because the ANC are going to go out to the electorate to try and sell aspects of the National Development Plan, but at the same time, the plan also plays into a more positive message for the business and the private sector, and of course, foreign investors who have become increasingly jittery about committing long-term capital funds into South Africa. So broadly speaking, I think this is very much a typical budget of a tight, limited leeway for the minister to, in fact, provide additional benefits to South Africans, to poor South Africans for that matter. And I think that we'll see more action when it comes to tax policy in future when it comes to other aspects of industrial policy going forward after May the 7th in what will probably be some sort of mini budget in the second half of the year?
Well, we had Andre Roux earlier talking to us about the fact that, and it's to all of you, the fact that the tax relief that's been given to those earning under 500,000 a year, if we take into account inflation as it is now, the fact that we now have a 12-cent increase in the fuel levy, an increase in the accident levy, we also have the e-tolls in Gauteng. If we add all these things together, they're probably going to chew into the cost of living to a level far beyond any relief that's been given.
Dale, or would you then say that it seems like any additional disposable cash will probably just be consumed up by the increase in food and other necessities once the fuel levy comes into effect on the 2nd of April 2014. So is the average South African working class consumer gaining much from the 2014 budget?
I don't see that at all. I think that there are other further taxes on tobacco and alcohol, which generally working people are the biggest consumers of those items. So you have further taxation, you have a continuation of VAT at 14%, you have all of these taxations which are regressive taxes on the poor by and large. So all of those remain in place. There's been no relief on that. So I think that by and large the poorest sections of South African population are going to suffer further as a result of this budget.
Well, we now have a situation where we actually have trade unions, COSATU trade unions, who are part of the tripartite alliance, the ANC-led alliance, picketing outside Parliament. This is the first time, as far as I'm concerned, I've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to lead to more fragmentation, more disillusionment, what within the trade union, not just the trade union movement, within the governing alliance itself?
I see that for sure. I think that the government is committed to its anti-working class approach, and I think that that is clearly evident by this budget, by the State of the Nation address, by the President Zuma. So I think all the indications are that there's a serious class warfare brewing, and I don't think that there's going to be any relief on that front anytime soon.
But the majority of COSATU still support the ANC in the coming election.
Well, I think there's clearly a division within COSATU on that question, and I think that those rifts are going to grow as a result of this clearly anti-working class measure on the eve of the national elections.
And the political fallout from that?
Well, I think it's hard to predict what the fallout would be, but I think clearly that the tensions within COSATU are going to continue to grow. I think it's going to become growingly evident that the continued support of the ANC in the elections is really not on, and I think it's going to be hard for that group within COSATU who are pushing that position to maintain their stance.
Do you think this is going to affect the number of votes, the way the votes go, the abstentions, or whatever? Is it going to affect the poll come May the 7th?
I've been only 3-4 years in this country now, so I'm not such a good judger of the. But I mean, normally, well, it would not increase the support of the government. And this is not all about numbers. We must remember what is happening on the ground also. So you have this huge infrastructure program which is directed towards making it easier to coal mining, the port in Richards Bay, Transnet, coal mining, etc. And now we have a serious competition in Mpumalanga between coal mining on the one hand and to use land for food production on the other. So you have a new kind of land dispossession, a new land grant taking place. And the government is all about sort of these huge projects. And there seems to be no, even if he talk about climate change, there's no awareness whatsoever about the threat of climate change, which is already affecting South Africa in Western Cape or on the South Coast where I stay now.
So the production aspect in terms of climate change.
Yeah, you have to break. Gordon, he likes to speak about intergenerational justice, but I mean the environment and the climate that we are leaving over to our children and our grandchildren, if we don't break this obsession with burning coal and fossil fuels, this has to be stopped. It has to be stopped.
We are now going to our social media and we're looking at what Fin24 users are getting back to us in terms of the political aspect of the 2014 budget. Stephen Feinberg commented on Fin24 asking how the government plans to rein in corruption. That is $1 million question, Stephen, and let's ask Daniel Silky. How do you think the government plans, first of all, plans to rein in corruption, and what do you think will actually be implemented in the plans that they have?
Well, look, I think you've seen the minister come out with a portion of the budget speech that does cover this and some of the efforts that government has to recover and to stay on issues of corruption. Clearly, there are audits and more vigorous audits of departments. But look, you know, we're going to have the issue of corruption for some time, and I think the issue here with this budget is that it introduces, whether you like it or not, it introduces the government's or the current government's intended commitment to press ahead with the National Development Plan. Now, that plan and the broad discussion around that plan from Trevor Manuel talks about changing entirely the civil service, creating what is called a capable state, a state in which political interference and corruption, of course, somehow miraculously takes a back in the pursuit of more efficient services to all South Africans. Now, if the government is successful in implementing the aspect of the National Development Plan, you are likely to see an effort to de-link the civil service from the ruling political party, to take political elite out of the civil service, which has been a bad habit of South Africa's service delivery over the course of the last 20 years, that linkage between civil servants and the ruling party in particular. And I think it's critical, if we are to root out corruption, and whatever bigger discussion we can have about it, the depoliticizing of the civil service to me is absolutely critical, barring the civil service from entering into business with government, from tendering for contracts in the very dubious manner in which so many of these tenders have gone through. This means a critical starting point. It should be politically popular amongst the broader South African population, but it won't be politically popular amongst those civil servants who have got into bad habits and have derived substantial benefit in their doings over the course of the last while. So I think there's a stated intention in the NDP to kickstart this anti-corruption drive. The question is, will the ruling party have the political will to implement this, and will they have enough support and substantial support after the election for them to have the guts to go through with these plans? I hope they do, but I think that's the way they're going to kickstart.
Thank you.
I think we all hope that the ruling party has the political will and guts to go through with the anti-corruption plans. As we end this segment, we look at some final things from our readers on Twitter. Chris Godfrey asked on Twitter if this was all about electioneering, but user Saul Muzuleki Nkumalo disagreed, saying that this is not a pre-election budget. Thank you, Saul. Saul said it is a 2014 South African budget, which has nothing to do with the elections. On that note, we say thank you so much to our panel of guests for joining us and for your valuable insight onto the political aspect of the 2014 budget.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Guys, can I leave the hangar? Thanks very much. Be well. You too. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
for panel discussion. Hello, and welcome to the Fin24 panel discussion on the economic and social impact of Budget 2014. I'm Shveka Puerta. With us in studio today, we have, in the blue shirt, Mr. Andre Roux, economist at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. Welcome, Andre.
Thank you. Hello.
Next to him, we have Leroux Roelofse, SA Director of Deloitte. Welcome.
Hello, welcome.
And on the far end, we have my partner in crime and co-anchor, Terry Bell.
Good afternoon. And in Johannesburg, we have on Google Hangout, Davy Ruert, the economist, and Mike Schuster of economist.co.za. Over to you, Ms. Fika, for the first question. Yeah.
For the first question, Andre, again, what would you say is the overall effect, the overall take on Budget 2014 on the lives of ordinary South African consumers?
I'm not sure whether it's an ordinary consumer.
True.
But for those who are fond of a tipple and a cigarette every now and again, obviously largely negative. But more seriously, I think in terms of tax, very limited tax relief, but tax relief as opposed to an added burden, I suppose that's moderately, makes them moderately happy. But if we take a look at a slightly bigger picture, much bigger picture, and some of the allocations of spending, not surprisingly, social welfare in general gets the lion's share of spending, that we can understand. Education is always right at the top. Social grant beneficiaries, I think the Minister mentioned close to 16 million in the next year or so. And I suppose there must be some concern there about the sustainability of this kind of system. We probably have one of the most redistributed societies on this planet. There are far fewer taxpayers than there are social grant beneficiaries. In fact, there are far fewer workers than there are social grant beneficiaries.
And what you're saying is, how long can South Africa as a country sustain this model?
Yes, that's not to say it doesn't have its merits. I think there's already some evidence emerging that shows that thanks to social grants there's been a slight deduction in poverty, and there's been a slight deduction in the so-called Gini coefficient. But longer term, one has to start wondering whether that money, 100 and something billion rand, could not be spent in a more, I suppose, efficient sense in thinking about the long-term implications.
Leroux, in terms of tax reforms, what are we looking at from the South African consumer? What did they get from Budget 2014?
I think the consumer has come out quite well. An interesting comment that was made by the Minister was around corporate tax take that is now back to the levels that it was in 2008, 2009. What he didn't say was that back then it was more than the VAT take by government. And we still see corporate tax being estimated to lag the take on VAT significantly. What that tells you is unless we can get the economy growing and we can get profitability coming up and companies paying more taxes, the scope to maneuver for the Minister to reduce individual taxes is really very limited. The 9.2 billion relief is nice, but it really is just addressing the creep, the fiscal creep in the brackets. It's nothing more than that. So what one should say is this is probably as good as it gets for the consumer where we are now, but sustainability is key. Sustainability runs through the speech, and when he speaks about tax, he speaks about equity, he speaks about fairness, about being a compact between the citizen and the state, and everyone needs to pay their fair share, but they want to see that that money is spent well. So there's a lot of, he's done very well with that hospital pass that is referred to, but he needs to get through the gap now, and that's the challenge.
Davy, did you hear that? Mike, did you hear that?
Not much, it was breaking up.
Well, what's your particular view on the effect on the economy overall of this particular budget of 2014?
Is that for Davy or for Mike?
For Mike first, and then for you, Davy.
Okay. Well, I think I had a look at different taxes.
All right. Davy, let Mike go first, please. Go, Mike.
Okay. I think we've got a situation where the economy is very slow. That slowness is showing up our vulnerability on being able to extend the welfare state. It's showing up our vulnerability in many other aspects. But I think overall he's trying to do a balancing act, and this is neither a budget for the election and neither is an austerity budget, but it is a budget that's clearly aimed at the markets and at rating agents, because the budget deficit falls to an unlikely 2.8%, and that makes a bit unbelievable, I guess, in 3 years' time. But I think that's where we are. I think if I look at the spending, he is trying to increase the spending more on the side of capital than on the side of welfare expenditure, but he's also throwing in all the state-owned enterprises and public entities to do that. And I think it's also important that there's actually, in a sense, a tax neutrality to it, because we stay at around 29% tax to GDP. It's come down slightly, but the personal income tax, the 9 billion, is less than 3%, so it's not it doesn't make up for the inflation or salary increases, and we will continue seeing above 10% growth per annum in personal income tax. He had to do that again because it's very likely that the company taxes are not going to come in as expected. And the other thing is the big strikes that we've had recently, and specifically the platinum strike, because the platinum industry a few years ago was the biggest contributor of company taxes, and I don't think it's going to be quite there for some time, because obviously are not going to get the revenue that they were hoping for.
Thank you, Mark. Davi, did you hear that? Would you care to comment?
Yes, mostly. Yeah. Okay, let me start in the reverse order. Let me start with the fiscal debt relative to GDP, and that's something I'm very concerned about. And now, remember, when you talk about fiscal debt numbers, you cannot. Well, the number that's number that you can't play around with. It's there, and it's very easy to understand, and everybody understands the fiscal debt number. But it's quite easy to jiggle around a little bit with the numbers when you talk about the fiscal deficit, for example, because what's included in the fiscal deficit and what not. Now, the fiscal deficit, that's the consolidated deficit, came in better than expected in the current financial year, and the main reason for that has to do with tax revenue doing quite well in the current financial year. Better than what most analysts expected, in fact, better than what I've expected as well. So state revenue is doing quite well, despite the economy being a little bit under pressure. That is, and I agree with Mike, that is just not sustainable, and over the next couple of years, the revenue, certainly the economy doesn't perform well, state revenue will without a doubt come under pressure. I think this was the last opportunity for the Minister of Finance to really, where he could really fall back on better revenue than what the economy actually gets in. On the state expenditure side, the Minister of Finance expenditure was actually a little bit less than the budgeted estimates for the current financial year, and the bottom line of that then is the fiscal deficit that is a little bit better than expected, despite weak economic growth. That, however, is the so-called consolidated number, and the Minister included certain items like, for example, the unemployment fund in those numbers, which make it a little bit lower than what the Reserve Bank is going to report, for example. But what I'm much, much more concerned about is the debt to GDP ratio. Now, the Minister of Finance did not mention this in his speech, or at least not what I've heard. He did say that the debt to GDP ratio is likely to go up to about 45% of GDP, but he referred to the net debt. And convention is always for everybody to talk about the so-called gross debt. And a year ago, the Minister of Finance told us that in 2 years' time, the gross debt will be at about 45% or so. And now all of a sudden, the gross debt is expected to reach 48%. And in fact, in 3 years' time, the Minister expects that to be 48.5%. Now, I am not as bullish as the Minister on economic growth, and that means that the ratio will probably get to about 50% of GDP within a very short period of time. So, at the moment, looking at the next 3 years, the Minister of Finance is increasing his expenditure, or his expectations for expenditure on things like social expenditure and on wages. That's where the biggest increases are. But the second biggest increase is on interest on state debt. Now remember the impact of high debt levels. We don't see that in the numbers yet because it takes about 2-3 years before you see the full impact of higher debt on the interest component of higher debt. And that will start biting us in 2 or 3 years' time. To make a long story short, the state finances at the moment is on an unsustainable trajectory. We will start getting into serious trouble within 2 or 3 years when state debt levels get close to 50%. We will have to fork out much, much more on things like interest on state debt, and that means we have to start cutting back on other things. I think the Minister of Finance had his last opportunity where it was relatively easy to do something about this unsustainable trajectory, because the next year and the year thereafter is going to be much more difficult to get the state off this trajectory, which is clearly totally unsustainable.
Thank you very much, Darby.
Andre,
Can
do you want to come in there?
If you don't mind, just endorse what Darby's saying there. As long as the deficit as a share of GDP is higher than the growth rate, the overall debt ratio is going to rise. And a second quick point, I think 6-7 years ago, the government debt ratio in Ireland and Portugal was less than 60%, if not less than 40%. You can see how quickly it changes, how rapidly it shoots up.
Can I add to that? Remember, not only are we talking about the fiscal debt levels that are going up to at an alarming rate, we have also turned the corner as far as the interest rate cycle is concerned. We know that interest rates are going to go up over the next couple of years, so we will be faced by two factors: rising debt levels as well as rising costs of debt. And pretty soon, at the moment, interest of state debt is just over 10% or so of total expenditure. And before you know it, interest will be close to 20%. And that means we have to cut back on something else. And that's the very difficult part.
Thank you, Darby. Thank you very much.
Leroux, your final thoughts on this?
No, I would just agree and add to that we're not going to get a garnish order lifted if we can't, if we run into debt. So we need to deal with it in another way. And that is to be fiscally conservative and to be conservative how we spend money.
Very, very interesting views coming through from our panel of economists. Right now, we're going to have a look at what our Fin24 users are saying on our social platforms. Pravin Gordhan said that we have to work together to radically change the economy. He said this means working with major businesses. In response, Fin24 user Kevin Duncan said on Facebook that trading with China is killing our economy. Kevin Duncan, I think that needs a segment all on its own. We've also got Karen Niemand. Why must people work together all the time? When is government going to start working for the people? I really think we should start taking that up with your local councillors to start out with. Thomas Mashadu on Twitter said that a radical economic change is not what is needed. What we need is a radical government change. Finally, we have Theo Sauls, who commented on the currency, saying Gordhan should concentrate on strengthening the rand instead of punishing the citizens for the weak rand. Theo Sauls, I think this is a comment that should definitely reach Pravin Gordhan's ears. I want to say a very big thank you to our panel for coming in and discussing the economic and social aspect of Budget 2014. Thank you, guys, and thank you for all our wonderful guests on Google Hangout.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to the Fin24 discussion on Budget 2014. I'm Mushfiqa Botha. With us on Google Hangout, we have Craig Polkinghorne, an analyst from Standard Bank. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks very much. Nice to be with you.
And also on my right, we have my partner in crime and co-anchor, Mr. Terry Bell.
Good afternoon. Hello, Craig.
Terry.
Well, Craig, this budget seems to have had no real surprises. It seems to be for the ship of state, it's steady as she goes. Would that apply to corporate South Africa as well?
I think it would. The background for this was a number of years of stability, and we're seeing more of the same. It hasn't produced or eased much, and we would expect the corporate environment in South Africa to react positively to the budget. There's been a lot of talk about what will investor sentiment be. There's been a lot of talk of how will poor people react to the budget. Their sentiments would be different to domestic corporate South Africans who I think take confidence from stability. They would want to see a policy that supports the rand, the volatile rand, in that it causes uncertainty, whether it's in the import bill or export possibilities. And I think they would also need to see, or would like to see, more done to support growth, as I think corporate South Africa links growth prospects with the current labour unrest that we see in the country at the moment. The other thing which I haven't impacted, but which will have an impact on the corporate environment, is the infrastructural spend, which is a very big number. The ability to roll that out and deliver that is, of course, a question that remains to be answered. But corporate South Africa will be looking to see where that's going to happen and how it can influence that.
But stability is, of course, at the centre of all of this. And it's a very narrow line to walk, is it not, between the amount of so-called social unrest or service delivery protests, as they're called, but social unrest, which does actually impact on the rand, the currency, the investor perception of South Africa. So that's a very, very delicate line to walk. And do you think that Pravin Gordhan has walked it well?
I think he has. I think he's had a very limited scope to make significant changes. A couple of years ago, there was probably more scope to be more radical. It was probably easier to be the finance minister. I think he's done a good job, difficult circumstances, and in an environment where the tax-paying population, whether it's corporate or personal, is shrinking as a proportion of the country, and in an environment where you are having low growth numbers, it's very difficult for a finance minister to try and appease the masses, I think, and at the same time keep investors interested. I think he's done a good job.
In terms of promoting SMMEs, I mean, this is something that I know both corporates and certainly the banking sector has been very keen on. Do you think enough has been done there in this particular budget?
There's always room for more to be done. I think there's the government can only do so much, and I don't think the private sector can necessarily blame government for SMME development. There's a huge opportunity for the public sector to actually rally around and try and create private sector initiatives that support SMMEs, and through that drive both improvement in GDP and growth and also employment, which I think is very necessary. So should it remain a focus? But I think government and the private sector should be working together on that one.
Thank you very much, Craig. Over to you, Mushfiqa.
I'd like to say thank you to the Standard Bank analyst, Craig Polkinghorne, for joining us on the session. And I'd like to ask you to stay tuned, because when we come back, we will be looking at what our Fin24 users are saying on our social platforms. Welcome back to our final segment on Budget 2014. And now we're going to have a look at what you had to say. Chris Hart on Twitter said that it is encouraging if the measures to combat corruption and wasted expenditure are implemented effectively. How can we implement these effectively? Terry?
Well, last year the same thing was said. We're going to implement these things effectively, and part of it was also that the government expenditure on cars, KFCs and takeaways, etc., stays at bed and breakfasts, that sort of thing, would be reduced or cut out completely, and credit cards were to be torn apart. It doesn't seem to have happened.
Very little seems to have happened. And what would we put that down to? Do you think South Africans have the right to be saying, you know what, you're telling us this is going to be done, what are you going to do to implement it?
I think we've had a year. Pravin Gordhan must be very angry about it because very little was done. There was a bit of demonstration, a good bit of media focus on cutting a credit card in half. But basically the expenditure hasn't gone down very much at all.
So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Indeed, so correct.
Nax on Twitter said she's relieved
Rates is going to really put more strain on people. I mean, a lot has been said about we should have expected the increase in the fuel levy, etc. But you say that to people, they say, that means my fuel's going to cost more. It means that every delivery is going to cost more. It means that my food is going to cost more. It means that everything, a knock-on effect. So you couldn't really do that as well.
I know, but would you put that down to being an election year?
I think that at all times, Pravin Gordhan had his eye on the fact that May the 7th is an election. It's less than 3 months away. You can't start to do silly things.
Carice Applebrand said on Twitter that she's upset about the hike in sin taxes. You and very many others. A lot of people on Twitter seem upset about this hike. Do you think it was warranted?
Well, I think they'd be upset, particularly if you're a smoker, you're an addict, and I am a former smoker who gave up many years ago, and I understand still what it's like. And I go back to the days where it cost a lot less than now. And those who enjoy their occasional drop of wine, and after all this is a wine drinking area in the Western Cape where we are, yes, I think people will be very upset. The spirit drinkers, well, I'm not a spirit drinker, so R4.75 a bottle is really going to hit them a bit.
What do you think we should be doing in terms of looking at other avenues of revenue and perhaps not upsetting the apple cart too much with the sin taxes?
Well, I personally have this big thing about the Tobin tax, a tax that's called the Robin Hood tax, that instead of having all this income tax, instead of having VAT, which is a regressive tax, because even the poorest pay it as well as the rich, so it means it hits them harder. A Tobin tax is all financial transactions, everything that goes through in any way, and there are billions and billions of rand go through every day. You simply put a tax on it of 0.005%, and on that basis alone we would raise more income than all the other taxes combined. But of course the banks don't like it, and corporate South Africa and the people who move money around and who gamble with money don't like it. I just happen to be one of those people who thinks it's a very good idea.
I hope you've put that down as a pointer for Pravin.
I shall.
Laura Katz on Twitter wants to know, what are the macroeconomics radical reforms? Terry?
I don't see there are any radical reforms to the macroeconomics. The basis of macroeconomics is either growth leading to redistribution in a country like this, because we need redistribution, or you turn it on its head, redistribution leading to growth. In 1996, the business lobby put forward growth for all as a policy, which was the trickle-down theory. If you made the rich richer, wealth would trickle down to the poor. Trade unions followed up with the original ANC policy, which was scrapped in 1994, which was, let us redistribute growth through all sorts of measures, not handouts, but through public works programs, infrastructure programs, etc. And that in turn would engineer growth. Well, that floated for a while before GEAR came in, which actually reversed it and went back to the original one. And that's where we're still stuck today. So there's no change in macroeconomic policy.
There's no real macroeconomic reforms to talk of. Okay, on Twitter, Azania said that she hopes to get an explanation of Gordon's mentioned 6 million jobs. You and many other people again, Zania. Jobs are a big factor leading up to the elections. Zania wants to know what your thoughts on this are, Terry.
Well, Pravin Gordhan and the ANC don't really say jobs, they say job opportunities. Now, there's a big difference between a job and a job opportunity. A job opportunity means that you get the opportunity to work for perhaps 3 months and it's supposed to give you some sort of training, some sort of introduction to the world of work, and then you're out of work again. I agree with the trade unions in this regard, that it's a complete waste of time and money. The DA, of course, not having much of a chance of getting into power, now say, no, we're in favour of 6 million real jobs. Well, I don't know where they're going to come from.
That's a very sad reality that we're facing. Hendrik said on Twitter that a ridiculous amount is being spent on social grants. Rather spend the money on job creation and education. What do you think about this, Terry?
Well, job creation is one thing. We spend an inordinate amount on education. The point is, what value do we get for education and the quality of that education? The main problem with our education is not what we spend, it's how we spend it.
Yes.
And the quality that we get for it. We are way, way behind in terms of technical education, in terms of catching up with the 21st century, in terms of our overall pedagogical approach.
We also have on Twitter, Sihlin Kubesi asks, why didn't the budget commit to cutting national government and shifting that cash to local government and social grants as a single negative income tax?
Ouch. We have nearly 300 local government bodies in this country. Less than 30 of them have got unqualified audits. In other words, we don't have the capacity, and we certainly have a load of problems at that level that first need to be sorted out before they're given any more money.
Getting back to education, Jay Naidu asked on Twitter why our kids are less literate and numerate than other African countries, with 253.8 billion rand being spent on education.
We spend, going back to that original one,
yes,
we actually spend more per capita than most other African countries, and we produce a much, much lower quality. And that's the reason why we need to relook at our entire education system. The education system is a mess. I mean, even government will admit that in a sort of offhand way. It is a mess, it needs to be dealt with, and money is not going to do it. We have to actually look at it structurally. There are a few NGOs that are actually doing it through tablets and this sort of thing. There's in Barrydale in the Western Cape, there's actually a pilot program that looks very promising.
Let's take a look at how the country responded to Pravin Gordhan's 2014 budget. In the Western Cape, we see that nobody was very interested in the budget. We were all interested in M&M and the design Indaba. I think, from a financial standpoint, most people in the Western Cape were peeved off that M&M tickets were now brought down from 850 Rand to 99 Rand. I would be too. I would be asking for 8 tickets. For my 850 Rand, you could keep the 50 Rand. You could use it for whatever you wanted to. I get that. Design Indaba, yes, we get that too. But come on, people, this was budget 2014. Come on, Western Cape. So now we're looking at the rest of the country. The rest of the country seemed very interested in what Pravin Gordhan and budget 2014 was all about.
Well, certainly Gauteng, and I suppose that's very interesting because Gauteng is the wealthiest province, the most industrialized, the center of our economy, if you will, and there you had the most interest was in, well, after the budget itself, in Pravin Gordhan. So, I mean, you have an awful lot of interest in that particular area. And the same applies actually if you go down the coast towards KwaZulu-Natal, also much more interest than the Western Cape. I suppose you're right, M&M, and I keep telling you Carlos Santana, but you won't listen to me.
I also see a little bit of Manchester there.
In Cape Town? It would
No,
have to
no, in East London. The people in Cape Town are all crying about Manchester.
Oh, that's right,
Not
yes.
Thank you so much to all our Fin24 users for your valuable comments. Please keep on sending them in, and we'll look at trying to read them out as best we can. Thank you for your support and your interest in Budget 2014.
Thank you very much indeed.